Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Labor Forum on WRFG 89.3 FM. I'm your temporary host, Dianne Mathiowetz, retired auto worker, member of Local 10, UAW, formerly worked out at the Doraville GM plant. Today we have a really terrific program. We're going to be doing an interview with Leigh Craigmyle, and we're going to be talking about tenants' rights. Before I begin, let me say that the views expressed on WRFG's Labor Forum do not necessarily reflect the views of the Board of Directors, its staff, or volunteers. Also, we want to give another shout out to Gary Washington, longtime host of the Labor Forum, who's recuperating. We want to thank Sonia for being the engineer while I do this program. And we want to say hello to Leigh, who's here. Leigh is an intake counselor with the Metro Fair Housing Services.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm really looking forward to learning all more about tenants' rights. So I have to say that I would guess that tenants don't have too many rights in Georgia, so how bad is it?
Well, that is unfortunately true. We're a fair housing organization, so, and we're 36 years old. We used to be neighbors of WRFG over here in Little Five Points. We work both with fair housing, which is part of the Civil Rights Act, and protects people of 7 classes from discrimination in housing and housing-related transactions. And additionally, we do work with tenants' rights, and sometimes landlords will actually call us. And it's rare, but sometimes landlords want to know what they can do, what they can't do, and how to do the right thing. Mostly tenants will call us when they're having any number of situations.
Could you tell us what those 7 groups are that are protected under the...
Yes, under fair housing.
Mm-hmm.
We have race, color, national origin, religion, gender, disability, and familial status. And familial status means that you've got somebody under the age of 18 in your household. So it may be that you're expecting to have a child, you're adopting a child, or maybe you've had a niece or nephew come to live with you.
Okay. So of all the complaints that tenants have, what would you say the number one issue is in Metro Atlanta? Is it getting your deposit back? Is it the landlord will fix things? What is the biggest thing?
I think the landlord not fixing things is probably the biggest complaint that we have. Right up there with it is bed bugs.
Bed bugs. All right. Okay, we'll talk about bed bugs a little later in the show, so people don't all turn off right now.
Right.
So what is a tenant supposed to do? They rent an apartment. It looked okay. Now all of a sudden the toilet stopped up. Something doesn't work.
Right. One of the things I like to warn tenants when they call or when I go out to speak to people is to see the actual apartment that you're going to be living in. A lot of people do what I call the bait and switch. They have you come and you see a model apartment, and it's all done up very nicely and it looks really cute and all of that
Clean.
stuff. Very clean, of course. And then you see that, and they may even have 2 and say, these are the 2 floor plans that are available, this is the price, isn't this great? And then you go and sign your lease, and then you move in, and you've got an apartment that has stained carpet or a ceiling caving in, knobs off of appliances, lights that don't work, that sort of thing. So I always say, see the apartment that you're going to live in, and make sure that apartment number is on the lease that you sign. And before you sign that lease, read the lease. Read it. And if you can't read it or you don't feel comfortable with it, give me a call and you can read it to me over the phone, fax it to me, or bring it into the office and I'll go over it. Because I just can't stand seeing people who've been taken advantage of. And a lot of people don't read their leases, so they don't know what they're signing.
Right. Well, I know most people, we look at these pages and pages of words that you don't understand, the therefores and the whereases.
Right.
And you listen to what the person tells you what it means, and then
Right.
you sign. 'Cause,
Right.
you know, you're operating on good faith, so you figure
Right.
everybody else is.
And there's not a standard lease. I think there's some apartment associations that issue a lease, but there's not a standard lease that's out there. So your lease that you sign 1 year for an apartment may be different from the one you sign the next year.
Okay.
So you want to make sure you get that and read it. And
Okay, so let's go back to this person moved in,
Mhm.
and now something isn't working. So
Right.
what is it what are their options? If the landlord refuses or just is really takes a long time to fix something?
The first thing I always say is to make a request and make it in writing, even if the policy is simply to make a phone call to a maintenance hotline, or to fill out a form. I always say, put it in writing and document it, and keep something yourself, even if it's a little calendar that you have, so that you can write down the dates when you contacted somebody, when the problem began. All of that it's very important. If you have the means to send a letter certified, or so that they have to sign and you'll have proof that they've actually gotten it, that's good. Or if you have a fax and you can do that, that's great as well. If you put in your request that you'd like to hear from them within a certain period of time, some things they need to fix immediately. If your hot water heater has burst, that needs to be taken care of immediately. And it's not only in your best interest, but it's in the best interest of the landlord, because water can cause a lot of damage. So I say make them aware of the problem. Don't think that they're going to automatically know that there's a problem. And you can make that phone call, but follow it up with a letter, even if the letter says, we just spoke it's 10 a.m. and we spoke 5 minutes ago regarding my hot water heater having burst. This is what we said. I wanted to make sure we're on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are hesitant to do that because they don't want their landlord to think they're weird, or they don't want them to think that they're slow or something if they document everything. But in the long run, it's far better to have them think whatever they want to about you, because then you're protected. You've protected yourself and you've established a paper trail.
Okay, let's even back up. So before you even get to the point where you've signed a lease, the issues of what are the bases on which a landlord cannot rent you an apartment, and what are the bases on which a landlord can decide not to rent an apartment
Well,
or house?
and that's kind of where fair housing comes into play. Even in advertising, they are required to make the apartment or rental, or even if somebody's selling a home in advertising, that has to be available to anybody. We recently had a case that settled with Harry Norman and a local sales agent who did not want to sell a condo to anyone with kids. And I think it was a $60,000 settlement, and those comments were made that they would not show these condo units to people that had children, children under a certain age. And so, in the sales process or advertising process, that's something they can't say. They can't discriminate against you based on that, based on your membership or perceived membership in one of the 7 protected classes that we went over. Now, if, say, you're gay or lesbian, they can discriminate against you, and they can tell you that too. So
Wow.
that's one.
So that's one of the.
That's a non-protected
That's one of the
class.
groups that still is not
Mhm.
regarded as
Yeah.
equal in this country.
Right. So sometimes I will get calls from people who say they told me that they didn't want to rent to me because I'm a lesbian, and it's heartbreaking to me as a queer person to have to say they can do that, and it's perfectly legal. But anyway, their advertisements have to follow fair housing law, and they can't use your membership or perceived membership in a protected class as a denial. They can use credit as a denial, saying that your credit is not good. they can look at your criminal history
404.
and say
447.
your criminal history is here. We see that you've
4087.
had an arrest for this, even if there's not a conviction.
4087.
They can say that we see that you've been arrested for this, and
No,
so
sorry,
we're
it's
not
not
going
that
to
one.
rent
It's
this apartment to you.
5233471.
And they also don't have to return that application fee.
71.
Okay.
So,
44.
Okay, so now, I think, I know when I think about, probably what I would regard as the most likely sources of discrimination would be, historically where, black families aren't, given leases or rentals or sales of homes, particularly in areas that are predominantly white.
right,
Is that still one of the biggest issues here in Metro Atlanta?
I don't know if it's the biggest issue, but that's certainly part of how our organization began. Shortly after the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968, and it was passed. I don't know if everyone's aware of this, but it was passed shortly after Dr. King was assassinated, because the country was just heartbroken and just in an uproar and rioting, and Lyndon Johnson had some choice words about getting it passed, and he kind of pushed it through, and it was passed and signed on April 11th, 1968, so it was very shortly after Dr. King was assassinated. That didn't include all of the protected classes we have today, but it started, and here in Atlanta, and specifically in DeKalb County, there were a lot of issues regarding what's called blockbusting and steering. Blockbusting is when someone, perhaps a real estate agent, will go into an area and say, hey you guys, there are a lot of Latinos coming in here, or a lot of African Americans are moving into the area. You want to sell your house before the price goes down. You don't want to live with these people. And so that's blockbusting. Steering is sort of another way, when showing homes, perhaps somebody might say, well, you don't want to live over there. Let's go look in Alpharetta instead of College Park. Somebody might say North Fulton's where you might want to live, to a white person, and that's steering, and that's also.
So I know that one of the ways that fair housing advocates gather the evidence
Mhm.
to back up a complaint is that they have testers
Yes.
who will go out, so that a white couple will go and then see how they're treated by either a landlord or a realtor, and then send a black couple or a Latino couple or whatever. And then you've got some basis upon which you can
Right.
say that the discrimination is happening.
Right.
So you still have testers?
Oh yes, we have testers, and we are always glad to have people who want to be testers. And we need a diverse group of testers. We've seen a great number of people who are testers, or who volunteer, who come out and say, I want to be a tester, who are African American. What we don't get a lot of, we don't get a lot of white people. And I don't know why that is, but I wish we'd get more, and
All right,
we need some
listeners
more.
out there, if there's anybody who's interested in being a tester,
Yes.
which means that you would help guarantee and ensure that everybody in Atlanta gets a fair chance at getting a decent place to live,
Mhm.
we'll ask Leigh to give the telephone number or how you would volunteer to do that.
If you are interested in being a tester, you can email our test coordinator at testers, TESTERS, at metrofairhousing.com. And you can also call us at Metro. Our number is 404-765-3940.
So Leigh, would that be the same number if there's somebody out there listening who's had a problem getting their deposit back, had a problem, I don't know, with repairs, had a landlord who uses a racial or some sort of slur when they have a disagreement? This is the same number everybody would use to reach you
Yes.
generally?
You can reach us at 404-765-3940 or 404-765-3985.
All right, so, is the biggest issue with housing rentals, or is it also sales? or does it just sort of break down? Because I'm thinking now, this is what I'm thinking.
Mhm.
I'm thinking that with so many people being foreclosed on and losing their homes, that now they're going into the rental market.
Mhm.
And now they got lousy credit because, right? Because their house was foreclosed on, maybe they've lost their job, which is why their house was foreclosed on. So that's not, I don't know, I guess that's in some ways not really an issue of fair housing, that's the fact that there's no affordable housing for people
Right.
now, so that's a slightly a different situation, huh?
Well, I think you hit something on the head there. The foreclosures we've seen. We've seen those happening in certain areas to certain groups of people
Absolutely.
more heavily. I believe the city of Baltimore brought suit against Wells Fargo,
That's correct.
and it was because Wells Fargo had been making loans to people who are in the African American community, and specifically they've been targeting churches. They've been
Mhm.
targeting African American churches and saying, you know, we'll give you some monetary incentive if you'll let us have a financial seminar here. And so they would have a little meeting, and if somebody applied for a loan, then the church would get a donation. Well, Wells Fargo would have African American employees go out and do these events and sort of have that sense of being part of the community conveyed.
Just try to help out.
Yeah, and some people within the company have actually given information to attorneys regarding how they would mark the different applications under language. It would say African American. So it's had a terrible impact upon the communities where that lending has been done in a discriminatory manner. They call it reverse redlining.
Mhm.
And that's something we're seeing. I think we're seeing it in Atlanta. We're seeing it especially, we've got data showing it in Memphis and Baltimore, and cities across the country are really seeing it pretty heavily. Atlanta and the metro area has experienced an obscene amount of foreclosures. And I think you're right that a lot of people are seeing that as a chance to invest in property, and they don't know what they're doing. They sometimes will rent and tell people that they can rent and not, you know, have a certain rate of rent that they pay, but they've got to fix it up. And they're not repairing things, and maybe they don't know fair housing laws. So we're seeing a lot of that of small renters. Small landlords.
Oh, you mean in other words, when because I'm also active with the Fighting Foreclosure Coalition, got arrested as a matter of fact in Wachovia, trying to get a meeting with them about this issue. But so when properties are put up for auction on the Fulton County steps on
Right,
the
because
first,
we're not a judicial
no,
foreclosure
judicial
state.
on the first Tuesday of every month, and it's thousands.
Mhm.
And if you go down there, you will see all kinds of people who are doing exactly what you're
Mhm.
talking about. They perceive that since they can get these properties at such a low cost, that they will now become small landlords.
Right.
So what you're saying is that some of those folks, because they're first-time or small-time landlords, that leases with them are even more problematic than with the sort of big apartment complexes, mostly because they're not as knowledgeable about what they're required to do, or?
I don't know if it's because they don't know or if they're just malicious. I'd like to think that it's because they don't know. I try to approach landlords. Sometimes clients will feel comfortable having me discuss a certain situation with their landlord and kind of be a third party.
Mhm.
And sometimes just having some outsider call makes a difference because the landlord thinks, oh, okay, this person's asserting their rights. They're going to stand up for themselves. But sometimes the landlords will say that they didn't realize that was something they were unable to do, or they'll say, you know, oh, I didn't realize that I couldn't do that. You know, this is my only property.
Okay, so when somebody rents property, are there certainly things that the house has to be up to code,
Mhm.
surely?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so many of the things that people do find, though, are things that aren't up to code.
Right.
We've seen on television, these both individual houses and apartment complexes where ceilings were falling in.
Yes.
There were rodents and cockroaches and, sewers backed up and just the most deplorable kind of things. And then people had been paying rent. Paying rent. So is this something that then goes into court, or is this, I guess I'm trying to find out, does Metro Fair Housing do anything legally, or are you just sort of an advocate?
We do have resources that we can do things through the courts, and help with filing complaints and doing letters. We're not able to go and take cases to court all the time, but we've got some great partners that we work with, some friends at Legal Aid, at Georgia Law Center for the Homeless, and the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers. Those are great groups that we've been able to partner with, and we have a few independent attorneys and law firms that have just been friends, and we're able to call them up and say, hey, this is a situation that's going on and it's pretty bad. Can you help us out and go to court with these people? And we can always welcome more friends that are attorneys that want to do that. But we do see apartments that are run down, and it breaks my heart because we get people that are so frustrated, and like you said, they have been paying rent. And it's good that they've been paying rent, because if they don't pay their rent, if they withhold their rent, they're up for eviction.
Okay, let's hold on. Let's hear
Okay.
this. Let's get this absolutely right. So if there is a landlord who doesn't fix things, and there are rats and there are roaches and the refrigerator doesn't work, and I could go on and on, the electrical is bad, and there's
Right.
only one plug in the whole place where the electricity works, and they've got extension cords running everywhere, and more. Bad things. If that person who's renting that apartment has tried and tried to get this landlord to fix stuff, they won't do it, they say, okay, if you don't fix it, I'm not gonna pay this month's rent, then that landlord has the total right to go and get them evicted?
Yes, that landlord can go
What
straight.
did I say about how there were no tenants' rights in Georgia?
That landlord can go right down to magistrate court and file a dispossessory.
Okay, what's this thing about putting money in escrow though? Is that an option?
That is something that is very complicated, and it's not something that we recommend for people to do because.
Leave it.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's this person, somebody out there listening right now, who's living in a real hellhole, and they've been paying rent, and the landlord won't, their only option is to move? Is that what we're trying to say? No,
because they've
okay.
still got that contract, so they don't want to have that slapped on their credit. What somebody's got to do, depending on their situation, it's going to vary. But I can think of a woman who I was working with, and she lived in a complex in Fulton County, and there was some problem with the roof, and there was a leak that had been coming, and she'd been letting the apartment complex know. She'd been letting the manager know. She'd been letting the owner know. She tracked down the owner's phone number and called him, and so she was letting them know constantly, saying, hey, this is getting bigger, the problem's getting bigger, and the hole went from being
WRFG,
about the size of a quarter to the size of her
you.
whole hand. And, then there's mold that starts growing, all this stuff that comes after, repairs are neglected. She withheld her rent.
So
And
I will ask.
I talked to her and I said, don't withhold your rent, don't withhold your rent, because they can evict you.
The name of the
And
organization.
she had a conversation with the owner, and he agreed, but he didn't put it in writing.
Just
He
hold on,
agreed to let her
and,
hold her
you'll be able
rent
to ask
until
me
they
the
repaired
question.
it.
Just hold on, please.
He didn't put it in writing, and she called me one day and said, I got served a warrant, and I've got to go to court. And she actually had to pay the back rent. I went to court and was there, and I saw the whole process, and I sat in with her through mediation, but it was sad, because she just wanted a place to live.
Okay, I believe we've got a caller on the line, so as soon as we get our headsets on, And, okay, I think we're ready. Caller, are you there? Okay. Can you speak up a little? Okay, one more time. So we have a caller who's asked again, Leigh, for the name of the organization and a phone number, because maybe they are experiencing this problem, and maybe there's others out there that will want to get a hold of you right away.
Please do. The organization is called Metro Fair Housing Services, and we can be reached at 404-765-3940. Just give us a call, and we'll be back in the office on Monday. Okay, I'll talk to you Monday.
And we'll do, just say the telephone number one more time.
404-765-3940, or you can reach us at our other number, 404-765-3985.
Caller, did you get that? Super. All right, so Leigh, in the last couple minutes that we have, is there any kind of other point that you think people should know? I guess I want to say that, you know, in lots of other cities and states, the rights of tenants are way stronger, you know, because tenants have organized. And I was wondering if you know of any tenant organizing going on, or...
I've seen some of the residents who are in senior high-rises attempt to do that. They're in income-based housing. Because they have more limited rights, it's something that I've not seen really follow through, because people are afraid of losing their home. There's such a limited amount of affordable housing in Atlanta that losing their home is a reality. I mean, we saw on national news how many people lined up in East Point to get an application to be on the Section 8 voucher program there. But I've been to many tenant groups of just people who live in a community, an apartment community, and they want to get together and know what their rights are. And I'm always glad to come out and talk to people about what their rights are, help them understand what they can do to address the situation. And, you know, if they want me to come out on the weekend so that management's not there, I'm always more than glad to do that. And myself, as well as another person on staff, are both, we both speak Spanish, so we can do that to help people who maybe aren't as comfortable in English as they are in Spanish.
Okay, well, I think this is a great service that the Labor Forum has had today by having Leigh here, because one of the things clearly, the first thing is to absolutely know your rights on all issues, whether it's on the job, in the community, from landlords, as a consumer, whatever. The point is to know your rights and then to exercise them. So obviously, if a group of tenants, you know, had similar problems and addressed it to a landlord, that already would be a step forward in showing some people power, which is the song that we're going to close out here, again with Power to the People by the Black Eyed Peas. As we close out today's edition of the Labor Forum, you've been listening to 89.3 FM WRFG in Atlanta. Thank you, Leigh.
Thank you.